I have just been watching three films which were mentioned by Thomas Sheridan. Those three films were Revenge of the Nerds 1, 2, and 3. By no criterion could they be considered first rate A movies, but Revenge of the Nerds 1 and 3 aren't bad. I'm talking now just exclusively from the cinematic point of view because there are other issues that more seriously arise with them. Revenge of the Nerds 1 was a watchable film. I couldn't get it online, and when I saw it, then having got it on DVD, I can see why, because it was a lot more racy and edgy than the woke mainstream would tolerate today. So there was an edge to Revenge of the Nerds 1 that the other two subsequent films did not have. Furthermore, there was a lot of nudity in it. There was frontal nudity, both upper and lower frontal nudity in it. And, you know, for a kind of a 15s frat boy type film, it was quite edgy. There was also one particular scene in which a man had sex with a woman without her knowledge of him being who he was. That would be seen now as what it would accurately be is a rape. And that was very, very... You wouldn't get that into a movie now. It was very questionable because what happened these are plot spoilers. What happened was one of the nerds pretended to be one of the jocks and had sex with one of the jocks' girlfriends. When she discovered who it was, rather than screaming rape, she thought he was so good in bed that she went off with him. And the longer term story of the three movies was that she ended up marrying him. That's controversial, and I accept that that's controversial. However much I might be opposed to wokeness, to have sex with a woman without her knowing who you are and thinking that you are in fact her sexual partner is a crime, and it's a bad thing to do. It's a very bad thing to do, objectively. This may be relevant to the broader issue. Thomas suggested looking at Revenge of the Nerds, the three films, not so much as comedies, because they're not very funny, but more as a manifesto, and I agree with him, having watched them, particularly Revenge of the Nerds 3. Revenge of the Nerds 3 is where you see the synthesis of the story. I think they made a fourth one, but I wasn't bothered watching it. And it's better to look at those movies and see them as serious commentary rather than attempting to look at them for their laughs, because really there weren't very many in any of them. Although Revenge of the Nerds 1 did have a certain, made in 1984, it did have a certain genuinely indie, rakish edge to it. Revenge of the Nerds 2 was completely without merit. Completely without, it might as well have not existed. Revenge of the Nerds 3 was a TV film, a made-for-TV film, so it had... First of all, it was sanitized somewhat in comparison, particularly to Revenge of the Nerds 1 and to a lesser extent Revenge of the Nerds 2. There's a gaslight at the bottom of these three films. And the gaslight that mightn't be apparent to everybody is that the heterosexual, big, sporty jock guys are stupid bullies. When I went to a rugby secondary school, I was very unhappy there. But I wouldn't really have very much said, if anything, against the rugby lads, particularly the A-stream rugby lads. The top team rugby guys I never ever had any hassle from. I was a gay emo who was into drama. I was going to drama school full time. They were, for the most part, hetero guys who were playing rugby. They had their thing, I had my thing. And indeed, by fifth year and sixth year, I'd become friendly with a lot of the kind of A-team rugby guys, because we all got on, and they made sure nobody bullied me, because they were big guys, and they were confident guys. A lot of them had long-term girlfriends by that time, quite similar to the jocks that you see in Revenge of the Nerds. But the gaslight of Revenge of the Nerds, first of all, is that they're bullies. My experience in school was that they weren't. And secondly, that they're stupid. My experience in school was that they're far from it, because this is what they won't tell you. A lot of those guys who are very good at sport, like rugby particularly, are also academically quite impressive as well. I've seen this play out in subsequent years. Many of those guys who are on the leading school rugby team go on to study to become doctors or lawyers or that kind of thing. It's simply the facts do not bear the narrative of Revenge of the Nerds that these top sporty guys are stupid. That's been my experience has been the diametric and clear opposite of it. I was a secondary teacher as well for 11 years, and I taught in schools where rugby was a big issue. That absolutely was consistent with my experience of the fellas who I taught in secondary schools. They tended to be brighter. The rugby guys tended to be brighter. They tended to be nicer fellas. They tended to be very confident with the teachers, so they would argue academic points with you in class, which I never minded. Far from it. They could make some very intelligent observations and insights. They didn't bully the younger kids. It was the same thing. They watched out for the younger, weaker kids. They were generous fellas. So this is a lie that has been perpetuated by Revenge of the Nerds. The fundamental lie is that these are unpleasant, stupid bullies. Far from it. The unpleasant, stupid bullies are the nerds. That's what I remember in secondary school. I remember from my own class in secondary school, there are 3 men now. They'd be older than me. I was the youngest in the class. I'm 47 now. They'd be 48 or 49 perhaps. There are 3 fellas from my particular form in my particular year of secondary school. The 3 of them have PhDs, and the 3 of them are absolutely a danger to society. They were a danger to society when they were teenagers. They're a danger to society now. I will say that with my hand on my heart. There's another fella in the class who got a PhD. He's not a danger to society. He wasn't part of the paradigm then. He's not part of it now. I'm naming no names. But certainly the notion that these 3 particular people who I'm referring to got PhDs and would now be considered by the likes of the Irish Times and particularly RTE to be learned individuals. No, Christ, no, absolutely not. They're dangerous to society. They're sociopaths. They were sociopaths in school and they're sociopaths now. And they were nerds. And I remember that about them, particularly in school. They were unpleasant people. They were people who were not liked in school. I remember even teachers speaking out against them in school. What we are seeing with Revenge of the Nerds is something that I also identified with Leo Varadkar, Simon Harris and Owen Murphy. They're nerds. Varadkar and Harris particularly worse than Murphy. Murphy has a polished veneer, although Murphy is a total sociopath. I remember actually drawing that analogy with Varadkar, Murphy and Harris, that these are nerds who managed just through such a broad range of factors, I won't waste time talking about them now, to end up Varadkar becoming Taoiseach and Harris and Murphy ending up with ministries because they backed up their guy. That's what happened. The primary culprit is the Irish voter for allowing these misfits to be re-elected to the Dáil, and they are misfits. Simon Harris is the crassest one of them. Simon Harris behaves like a 9-year-old. Varadkar, possibly because he gets a greater backing from the mainstream media, is less obviously mentally defective than Simon Harris, but he is mentally defective. So is Owen Murphy. I have a lot of criticisms of secondary education, both having been a pupil and having been a teacher in secondary education. But there is something that it does give kids. It shows them the need to change if they want to be popular or liked or accepted in society. Some of them are able to change and some of them are not. The ones who are not are the nerds. Now, another kind of secondary gaslight of Revenge of the Nerds is that all of these nerds were good with computers. No, some of them are just crap. Some of them are just rubbish individuals, you know. The notion that they all suddenly become brilliant at computers is not something that is borne out. Okay, many of those people who are really, really good at computers may, through no fault of their own, not have social skills, that kind of thing. Um, but that doesn't mean that because you're a nerd who dresses badly and all that you're automatically intelligent. This is a gaslight as well. There's another gaslight. It's particularly bedevils the Irish education system, that if you can pass exams, you are immediately an intelligent person. And that's rubbish. Anybody will tell you that that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. You know, when I was a teacher, I met very many other excellent teachers who were finding themselves driven slowly insane by the system. I'm so glad I got out in 2012 when we see what's happened now with the nonsense of social distancing, the nonsense of COVID-19. Incidentally, there's an article on the front cover of today's London Times, good for them, saying effectively that herd immunity was the only way to go. That they gave that front cover and top headline in the London Times. They'd never do that in the Irish Times or RTE. They're going to peddle that lie till the absolute last breath of it. But it seems that the London Times has broken ranks in that regard. We're getting back, though, to Revenge of the Nerds. The nerds are people who are not socially well adjusted. So what happened with the nerds, with the exception of one character, Booger was a different character from the rest of them. The nerds were people who came together simply because they had no other friends. I'm afraid that's the hard reality of it. The nerds were people who came together simply because they had no other friends. Then they all discovered they liked computers. That was the story of Revenge of the Nerds. One of them, Poindexter, was a talented musician. Again, that's a gaslight. You know, you can be a very talented musician and not, you know, look like a total sociopath and behave that way either. Now, a defence that they would put up in favour of Revenge of the Nerds was, well, hey, it was all just a big laugh and you shouldn't be taking the film seriously. Look, we can interpret any message we want to from that. Let's not be gassed at then by saying, sure, it's only a silly film, isn't it? These things carry subliminal messages. At the back of a lot of these people, I see it with Radker, Harris and Murphy, is anger at the fact that they were never the popular kids. There's a commentator on Twitter who I've great regard for, and he always talks about, he identified something that I agreed with once he identified it. Varadkar always wanted to be the popular kid. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that totally. Varadkar wants to be cool. He wants to be one of those jocks who was cool in school. You know? And that's a superficial vision of things, because what I remember in school with the jocks is that they had their own problems. They were boys of 16 or 17, maybe 18. Some of them were sexually active, I know that. They had confidence, they were ahead of their years. You know, they were bigger, they were sporty, they were popular, that kind of thing. But they had their own issues to deal with. They were human beings as well. I remember a lot of those guys. I remember one of the jocks. I was in the gym and I was having a look at the weight machines. He said, do you want to go? So he gave me a training session for about half an hour. And I was very weedy and skinny in school. And I think he recognised the fact that I didn't like it. I didn't like being weedy and skinny because it allows certain other pricks to prey upon you. So he put me through my paces, this rugby jock did. You know, I'd say, I can't do any more. Bullshit, he'd say. And he was laughing and I was laughing. And I always remember that so nicely. And if I ever met that man again, he'd be probably 48, 49 again. I'd always shake his hand and I'd be glad to meet him. I don't keep in contact with the school. I don't keep in contact with the fellas. But if he were ever to approach me, I'd always give him the time of day. Always, I'd give him the time of day. You know, so there was this rugby jock who saw that I didn't like being skinny and weedy. And he said, hey, we'll give this guy a lash here, you know. And he was a good trainer as well. Come on, you can do another one. No, I can't. You can. Bullshit. You know, and he was good at it. And, you know, he was a well-rounded... Okay, he was 16 or 17, but he was a well-rounded human being. And he was kind. I thought that was a kind thing of him to do. He did it in this bully and jock manner, but that worked. It worked for him and it worked for me. They're humans too. I remember it when I was teaching. I remember a kid in 5th year in a secondary school I was teaching in, and he drummed up a lot of courage to come to me and he said, sir, I'm going to be playing rugby on Saturday. Would you like to come and see me? Oh, I said, look, Jesus, I said, I can't make it that day. Oh, well, he said, I'll send you photos. And the next day on his phone, when he came into school, he showed me photos of him playing rugby. You know? Uh, I was flattered that he wanted me to come and watch him play rugby. I was very flattered at that. Um, and this gets back to the thing of the fact, these rugby guys, they're generally better well-rounded than a lot of the nerds. One feels with Revenge of the Nerds that there was a group of people there who were trying to tell their story of their pain, perhaps, of being excluded in secondary school. That's valid. Secondary school can be a very, very cruel environment for people. I say that having been a teacher. I say that from my own experience of it. I coped better than some, particularly given that I was this gay emo who was into drama. But I was very heavily into drama. And by the time I got to third and fourth year in school, the boys knew that. I wasn't fucking around there. I was serious about that. By fifth and sixth year, I was hanging around with all the other emos and with kind of the other dropouts. We all percolated our way down to lower stream classes, which, according to my absolute psychopath of a form teacher, that was the worst thing in the world that I was in the lower stream classes. In fact, it was the best thing, because by sixth year in school, I was in with all the people who had all the crack. I remember when we'd all get into trouble and be in detention. It'd be like arriving in prison. You'd go to detention. It'd be like arriving in prison. You'd come in, everybody would go, "Hey!" You'd meet all your friends in detention. And we would go wild in detention. And they'd always have some substitute teacher. They'd have the elderly teacher who was due to retire, would be supervising the detention. Jesus, detention would be the best of crack. It would be the best of crack in sixth year. I'm glad I went into the lower stream classes, because in January of 1991 I had a place in acting school and I didn't have to do any exams in school. I ended up doing my school exams and, my leaving cert. I got a good leaving cert, which saw me get into university when I was 21. But I didn't have to. I had a place in acting school already. The jocks are all pleased for me. They were jealous, the jock said. They said, you don't have to fucking do the leaving cert. I know, I said, But there was a lot of bullying in my secondary school. There was a hell of a lot of bullying, but it wasn't from the jocks. It was more from the nerdy types and from those in-betweeners. The NPC bordering on normie types. There was a lot of bullying. And I got bullied a lot and harassed a lot until the jock stepped in and made it stop. School is painful for a lot of people. It was painful for me, and I saw when I was a secondary teacher how it could be very, very painful for some kids. And if you have a conscience as a teacher, to see kids bullied and to see kids depressed in school, and I saw a lot of that, it's very hard to turn a blind eye to it, but just very little you can do, particularly when you have a school management, as so many of them were, who are not sympathetic to the kids. I taught in some schools where the management and principals and teachers of the school were among the most highly principled, decent people I've ever had the good luck to work with. I always made sure to tell them that and to let them know how highly I regarded them as people, as professionals, and their standards in their workplace. I made it my business to let them know my respect for them. I also, in schools that were the opposite of it, I need to finish what's coming here. I made it my damn fucking business to let the bad teachers and bad managements know in no uncertain terms what I thought of them. I didn't train as a teacher to put up with that crap. I could always get myself a job in a shop. I never had a snobbery about work. If you're earning money, you're earning money. If you're cleaning sewers, you could end up earning $1,000 a week. People who clean sewers and are willing to put their time into it could earn far more than any school teacher. So money's money. Honest work is honest work. Forget that bourgeois notion of having a prestigious job. To hell with that. So when I was teaching, I refused to compromise my own standards up to a point, but there were certain things that you just couldn't deal with, and that it was beyond your own jurisdiction to deal with. I always made sure that if I saw a kid being bullied, that my superiors were notified of it in writing by me. Whether they did anything about it is their problem, it's on their conscience. But it's okay because they don't have a conscience, many of them. Secondary school, when you talk about it even to yourself or to others, it evokes very strong emotions in very many people. More than primary school. Roddy Doyle wrote about it, and I'm not an unconditional fan of Roddy Doyle, but there's merit to some of his material. When he writes about secondary school, he's strong. He was a secondary teacher himself. In The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, he describes it's a first-person narrative by Paula. And she describes how when she went from primary school, we were told we were great. Everything we did in primary school, we were told we were the best. From the moment we went into secondary school, we were told we were useless. That's right. That's what my secondary school was like. And it evokes very strong emotions in people. Revenge of the Nerds is not a secondary school story. There are other films of that nature dealing with teen romps in secondary schools. But Revenge of the Nerds, by the time Revenge of the Nerds starts in Revenge of the Nerds 1, the primary characters are are just about to start university. And they run up against the jocks, and the jocks pick on them as nerds. And again, that just doesn't add up, because the jocks don't care about the nerds. The nerds don't come onto the radar with the jocks. The jocks are too busy drinking and partying, having sex and playing sport. As well, perhaps. In all of these films, you never see them actually doing any academic work. Never, ever in any of these films do you see any of these people doing academic work. Hey, I got a scholarship to go such and such state university. Yeah, great. All they seem to do is play basketball or play American football, drink, have sex, and get into trouble. You never see them actually going in and doing lectures or things. I don't know how American universities work. I've waffled. Revenge of the Nerds 3 is a lot darker than the two previous ones. Revenge of the Nerds 2 can be erased from consideration because it's of such little merit. So really, if you want to talk about Revenge of the Nerds, it's better to talk about Revenge of the Nerds 1 and see Revenge of the Nerds 3 as the sequel to Revenge of the Nerds 1. What we see the nerds doing is very serious. We see them crashing the computer system of the entire town deliberately, shutting down the electrical grid and shutting down banking. Does that sound familiar? And that was in 1992 that film came out. That was a warning. The nerds now, the likes of, misanthropes like Bill Gates, Varadkar at a lesser extent, Murphy, Harris, they're the ones who are calling the shots at the moment. And they are. Tony Holohan. Tony Holohan's a nerd and a misanthrope. I bet in school, I just know what Holohan would have been like in school. I know what that thing would have been like in school. What we see in Revenge of the Nerds 3 is that the nerds are not getting their way. By the time Revenge of the Nerds 3 starts, they have the upper hand in Adams University. So when Revenge of the Nerds 1 starts, it's more of a centre ground university where the jocks are there and the nerds are there and the computer people are there. But by the time Revenge of the Nerds 3 comes around, it's a geek university. They may portray it as a utopia. That kind of place would not be a utopia under those kind. That would not be a utopia under those kind. It would be more of a utopia if it was run by the jocks. Honestly, because they just live and let live. Somebody had a post on Twitter last night. Imagine how nice our lives would be if the government just backed off and stopped meddling in everything. Yeah. Puts it very well. Twitter can sometimes be very, very cogent. That's probably why they shut down Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is a master at Twitter. He was a master shitlord on Twitter. Nobody shitposted on Twitter like Trump. Trump had it to a fine art. That's why he frightened them all. Obama used to tweet. I think probably his predecessor, Bush, tweeted. But Trump went totally off message with the tweeting. Obama would tweet stuff that was nice and woke and all the rest of it. Trump just came out with whatever suited him. He'd come out with these howitzers on Twitter. I know this myself. I'm good at Twitter, pardon me for boasting. but I know how to just completely puncture somebody with one sentence. That's how Twitter works. Twitter's a terribly cogent medium. And again, perhaps it's a gaslight to suggest that Twitter's an eejity medium. Twitter is a very, very sharp medium, because you have to get what you're going to say in, really, in one tweet. And Twitter, more than any of the other social media platforms, Twitter is where the principle of less is more is really evident. So you can get it in quickly in Twitter. It's like a rapier. I like Twitter. I didn't think I would. My following on Twitter only grew in the past 10 months, really. I only got interested in it in the past 10 months. But I like Twitter. I like the immediacy of it. I like the way things trend on Twitter. I like the way you can see what's happening on Twitter. The closure of Donald Trump's Twitter account was for a reason. Because he's good at it. That's why they did it. Because he's good at Twitter. You know, I can see that totally with Trump, that he's good at Twitter. Totally, it makes sense, you know. They're very frightened of Trump. But what they did was they did the nerd thing, and, you know, they threw the, you know, they stole the election in the US. That would have been, nerds would have been behind that. Because that was a very, very big orchestrated job to throw that, to steal that election in favour of Biden. And then when things started going wrong, you know, the nerds then attacked Trump. Bill Gates is a nerd. A lot of these people are nerds. We're seeing them all over the place. We are now at a global level, particularly in the Western economies, in the situation that was in Revenge of the Nerds 3, where they just decide to shut us down. They have just decided to shut us down. And it was a forewarning. At the back of these seemingly harmless kids is anger and is frustration at the fact that, okay, they're good at computers or whatever, they might be good at science or maths. But ultimately they're not able to mix, many of them are not able to mix on an everyday level with real people. They're not able to get out there and pull, you know, the number one pussy. Or ass, because a lot of jocks, I had to get this in. Within that broader fraternity of jocks, you'd be surprised how big the minority of gay men is. And they're coming out more, and this is a good thing, you know. So whether you're able, you know, I remember this myself. When I was in my 20s, I got with a lot of jocks. And it was they who encouraged me to get into the gym and said, you know, you'll be more confident if you do it. Get into the gym, work out hard, eat lots of red meat, get confident. You know, they were gay jocks who said that to me. And they were nice guys as well. A lot of those gay jocks are just top blokes, altogether absolutely top blokes, although I'm not dissing the heterosexual jocks as well. But this is where we're at now. And a coup has taken place. The presidential election in the United States has been hijacked by the nerds. They're now closing down all of our means of communication. It's likely that they'll begin possibly closing down our power supplies. That's what happened in Revenge of the Nerds. The power supply was shut off as well. So not only did they shut off the means of communication, but they shut off the means of power. Sinister. Very sinister. Very sinister. Eventually we will get back to that medium, that middle ground that the university was in 1984 and the start of Revenge of the Nerds 1. There was a balance there. Okay, you know, according to the story, the coach in charge of the team was very boorish and all the rest. Played very well by John Goodman, who went on then to play Dan in Roseanne. Great actor, John Goodman, very good actor. Nice man as well. But this is where we're at now at the moment. We have these nerds like Varadkar and this pussy little... He is a psychopath, Micheál Martin, who has been terrorised by the nerds rather than having the courage just once in his life to turn around and say no to them. No, Martin wouldn't do that. No. But that's where we're at, and that's where you see the message in Revenge of the Nerds.